It wasn't just a business. It was a promise I had made to myself, whispered in the dark after years of feeling invisible. My graphic design studio, Aura Designs, was more than a name on a glass door. It was the physical shape of my soul. I had built it from nothing. I remember the thrill of landing my first real client, the smell of fresh ink on my first set of business cards, the quiet pride of turning the key in the lock of my own small office for the very first time. It was my sanctuary, my proof that I could create something of value, something that was entirely mine. My family called it my little project, a charming hobby for a girl with artistic talent. At Sunday dinners, they would raise a glass to my latest success, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. "Look at Clara, our little entrepreneur," my father would say, patting my shoulder with a laugh that felt more like a dismissal than a celebration. They saw the polished surface, the awards I won, the features in local blogs. They never saw the 18-hour days, the payroll I stressed over, the constant fear of failure that gnawed at me even in my sleep. The foundation of Aura Designs rested on one major client, a corporate account that provided the stability I needed to hire to other designers and dream of expansion. This client came through a recommendation from my uncle, a connection that was meant to be a safety net. "They're solid people, Clara, family friends," he had assured me. For 2 years they were, until the email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was cold, corporate, and final. Due to internal restructuring, our contract was terminated, effective immediately. I read it 3 times, the words blurring as a wave of ice water washed over me. 60% of my revenue gone. Just like that. The numbers began to spin in my head. Rent, salaries, outstanding invoices to my suppliers. The promise I had built with my own 2 hands was shattering. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of panic. I stared at the termination letter, a single sheet of paper that was a death sentence for my dream. My first, desperate instinct was to call for help. My hands trembled, but I dialed my mother's number. They were my family. Of course they would understand. Of course they would help. The phone line was quiet for a moment too long before my mother's voice returned, devoid of any warmth. "Clara, this is a serious matter. Your father and I need to discuss this. Be here for dinner at 7. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. The drive to my childhood home was a blur of familiar streets that suddenly felt alien. The house stood exactly as it always had, a beacon of stability and comfort. But as I walked up the path, a profound sense of dread settled in my stomach. I was walking into a courthouse, not a home, and I was the one on trial. The air inside was thick with a tense, formal silence. It felt like part of a stage play, a performance of normalcy before the verdict was read. My father sat at the head of the table, his face a stony mask of disappointment. My mother moved around the kitchen, her movements brisk and efficient, avoiding my eyes. My older brother Leo, the one who took the safe corporate job, gave me a tight, pitying smile that was worse than any frown. No one asked how I was. Instead, the interrogation began over plates of food I couldn't swallow. "How much debt are you in?" my father asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "Did you not have a contingency plan? I thought you were supposed to be a smart businesswoman," Leo chimed in. "I always said a passion project was risky. You should have had a more stable career path, Clara." Every question was an accusation. Every piece of advice was a disguised "I told you so." I tried to explain the situation, the sudden contract termination, but my words were brushed aside like irrelevant details. They weren't interested in the cause. They had already decided on the crime, my failure. Finally, I looked at my father, my voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I need help." "Alone, just to cover payroll and rent until I can figure things out?" He placed his fork and knife down with a deliberate final click. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice cold and flat. "We will not throw good money after bad. This company of yours, it has embarrassed us. It has put the family name at risk through association." My mother nodded in agreement. "This is a lesson, Clara, a difficult one, but one you need to learn. On your own, you made your choices." He didn't just say no. He pointed me to the door. As I walked out into the cold night, the only thing they gave me was the weight of their blame. The silence was the worst part. In the days that followed my exile, I expected a call, a text, anything. A moment of regret from my mother, a gruff check-in from my father. But my phone remained dark, a silent monument to their indifference. The silence confirmed their verdict. I was no longer their problem. I was no longer their anything. That crushing silence gave me no choice but to face the ruin alone. My first call was to my 2 employees, my small team. Telling them that Aura Designs was closing, that their paychecks would be their last, was the hardest conversation of my life. I could hear the shock and fear in their voices, and I absorbed their Disappointment because my family had taught me I had to. Then came the flood of emails from suppliers and vendors. Their polite inquiries quickly turning to angry demands for payment. Each message was a fresh stab of failure. The official eviction notice for my office space arrived, its legal language, cold and unforgiving. I had 30 days to vacate the place I had poured my life into. Each day was a new level of dismantling my dream. Packing up the design books, the art prints I had carefully chosen, the coffee mugs with our logo, it was a funeral for a life that had just begun. The ruin of my business bled into my personal life like a spreading stain. My savings, once a source of pride and security, were drained to cover final payroll and a fraction of my debts. I watched my bank account balance shrank to double digits. Every happy couple I saw, every family laughing in the park felt like a personal insult. I was adrift in a sea of shame. Their accusations, my only anchor. I had failed. I was a disappointment. I was exactly who they said I was. I spent a week dismantling my dream, piece by painful piece. I thought things couldn't get worse. That was until I came home to find the official eviction notice taped to my own front door. Losing your home isn't a single event. It's a series of small, grinding humiliations. It's packing your life into cardboard boxes, each one feeling heavier than the last. It's the pitying glances from neighbors who used to ask about my business. Now watching me load my few belongings into my beat-up car, with my savings gone and my last rent check having bounced, I had 2 weeks before the landlord changed the locks. 2 weeks to become a ghost. I spent the first few nights in my car, parked in the anonymous lots of 24-hour supermarkets, reclining the driver's seat and trying to ignore the ache in my back and the fear in my heart. But the little money I had was dwindling fast. Spent on gas and cheap food. That's when my eyes fell upon the last object of any value I owned. It was a simple gold locket, a gift from my grandmother. It wasn't worth much, but its sentimental value was immeasurable. It held tiny faded pictures of her and my grandfather, a relic from a time when family felt like an unbreakable shield. Selling it felt like selling my last good memory. The walk to the pawn shop on the other side of town was a walk of shame. I felt like every person on the street could see my desperation. The shop itself smelled of dust and disappointment, a museum of broken dreams. The man behind the counter barely looked at me, his eyes glancing at the locket with professional indifference. He weighed it, scratched it with a tool, and named a price that was an insult to its memory, but a lifeline to my survival. I remember the feeling of the cold, worn-out bills he pushed across the counter and the empty space on my neck where the locket used to rest. I had traded my past for a few more days of a miserable present. I didn't go back to my car right away. Sitting on a cold park bench under the pale city lights, clutching the few crumpled bills, I realized I had nothing left. No home, no dream, no family, not even a memory I could hold on to. It was in that absolute hollow emptiness that a tiny, dangerous spark ignited in the dark. There's a strange clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom. When you have nothing left to lose, you also have nothing left to fear. Sitting on that park bench, the cold of the metal seeping through my thin jacket, the crumpled bills in my pocket, feeling like both a victory and a defeat, something shifted inside me. The endless loop of my family's words, failure, disappointment. Your mess began to change. They were no longer just painful accusations. They became a challenge. They wanted me to learn a lesson. Fine, I would learn. But it wouldn't be the lesson in humility and defeat they had intended. The lesson would be that I could survive them. I could survive their judgment, their abandonment, their cold, conditional love. That night, under the indifferent gaze of the moon, I made a decision. It wasn't a grand plan for a triumphant comeback. It was something much quieter, much harder. I decided to let them go. I released the desperate, childish hope that they would call, that they would apologize, that they would see the error of their ways. I accepted that the family I wanted was a fantasy, and the family I had was a cage I had to escape. The anger that had been simmering beneath my shame finally boiled over into a cold, hard resolve. I would not fail just to prove them right. I would not disappear. I would rebuild, not to show them, but to show myself. I stood up from the bench, my back aching, my spirit bruised, but my path forward suddenly clear. I started walking, with no destination in mind, just moving. It was past midnight when I saw it, a faded help wanted sign in the window of a 24-hour diner. The light inside was a sickly yellow. The whole place looked tired and worn. It was as far from the sleek, minimalist aesthetic of my design studio as one could get. It was perfect. I walked into the greasy warmth of the diner, the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, a strange kind of perfume. The manager looked me up and down. Skeptical experience, he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm a fast learner, I said. My new life started that night under the hum of fluorescent lights, with the clatter of cheap ceramic plates as my soundtrack. My new life was measured in aching feet and the smell of grease that clung to my hair. The diner was a world away from the clean lines and creative energy of my studio. Here, success was a perfectly flipped pancake, a coffee cup refilled before the customer had to ask. For 8 hours a day, I wasn't Clara, the failed entrepreneur. I was just a waitress, an invisible face serving people who never looked me in the eye. It was humbling, grueling work, but it was honest. The meager tips I earned, crumpled bills I smoothed out at the end of each shift, felt more real than any of the money that had passed through my business accounts. With my first 2 weeks of pay, I rented a small, bleak room in a house on the industrial side of town. It had a single bed, a small window that looked out onto a brick wall, and a shared bathroom down the hall. It was a palace. It was mine, paid for with my own 2 hands. But the diner was just for survival. The rebuilding happened after my shift ended. Every evening, I would go to the public library, the city's silent cathedral of second chances. The free Wi-Fi became my lifeline. Using the library's old, slow computers, I enrolled in online courses for digital marketing and SEO, skills that would complement my design background. Under a new anonymous name, I joined freelance websites, taking on tiny, soul-crushing design jobs for $5 or $10. I designed logos for pet grooming services and flyers for local bands. My old creative pride swallowed by the necessity of earning another dollar. This was my second shift, my secret investment in a future no one else knew I was planning. Slowly, something inside me began to change. The shame started to recede, replaced by a tough, resilient pride. I was exhausted, but I was self-sufficient. I wasn't depending on anyone. The call from my family never came, and for the first time I realized I was no longer waiting for it. Months blurred into a cycle of exhaustion and effort. Then, one evening, an email lit up the library's dingy monitor. It was from a small e-commerce client I'd been doing cheap logo work for. "Your designs have doubled our click-through rate." It read, "We'd like to offer you a monthly retainer to manage all our branding." It wasn't a fortune, it wasn't a comeback, but it was the first brick, solidly placed in a wall only I could see. That first monthly retainer was more than just money. It was a crack of light in a long, dark tunnel. It was external validation, proof that my skills had value, independent of my family's name or my past failures. That small, consistent income changed everything. It fueled a new level of focus. My nights at the library became even more intense. Every project I completed for that first client was a stepping stone. They were so impressed with my work that they recommended me to another business, and that business recommended me to another. My anonymous freelance profile began to accumulate glowing 5-star reviews. I was no longer taking $5 jobs out of desperation. I was bidding on substantial projects and I was winning them. My portfolio grew, my confidence swelled, and my bank account, for the first time in over a year, began to look healthy. The day I walked into the diner and gave my 2 weeks' notice was a quiet, personal victory. I hung up my stained apron for the last time, not with bitterness, but with a profound sense of gratitude. That job had saved me when no one else would. It had taught me a humility and a work ethic that I would carry with me forever. Walking out of that greasy spoon for the last time felt like walking away from a past self. With the steady income from my freelance work, I moved out of the depressing rented room and into a small studio apartment. It was tiny, but it was all mine. Having my own kitchen, my own bathroom, my own front door to lock felt like the ultimate luxury. I bought a new, powerful laptop, a real professional tool, and the first purchase I made felt like a declaration of intent. I was no longer just surviving. I was investing in myself. One night, sitting in my own small apartment, on a chair I bought with money I earned, I looked at the spreadsheet of my clients. The numbers were stable. The growth was real. The anonymous freelancer I had created out of desperation was now a viable, thriving business. And an idea, one I had long thought buried and dead, began to take root in my mind. What if I made it official? What if I built a company again, but this time, on my own terms, with no one's name attached but my own? The idea of starting again, of putting my own name on a business, was terrifying. The scars from Aura Designs were still tender, but the freelancer I had become was resilient, smarter, and tougher. This time, there would be no family connections, no shortcuts, no seeking of approval. I took a deep breath and leaped. I named it Phoenix Digital. It was a promise to myself, a symbol of rising from the ashes of my old life. The launch was quiet, with no fanfare. I simply converted my best freelance clients into the new company's first accounts. I hired a sharp young developer I met through an online forum, and together we worked out of a small shared office space. We didn't focus on flash, we focused on delivering undeniable results. For 2 years, we kept our heads down and worked. We specialized in helping struggling small businesses overhaul their digital presence. Turning their fortunes around with smart, data-driven design, my own story of failure became my greatest asset. I understood their fears because I had lived them. Then, we won the contract for the city's official tourism campaign, beating out 3 of the largest agencies in the region. That victory put us on the map. It led to a nomination for the Digital Innovator of the Year award. I almost didn't go to the ceremony. The memory of past humiliations still a ghost at my shoulder, but I went. And when they called the name, Phoenix Digital, I felt a surge of pride so pure and powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The next week, a major business journal ran a feature story on me, From Ashes to Acclaim, how Clara Rose built a digital powerhouse. They told the story of a resilient entrepreneur who had overcome adversity to build one of the city's most exciting new companies. They didn't know the half of it. I sat in my new office, the small award gleaming on my desk, the magazine open, to the article about my success. For the first time, I felt a sense of profound peace. My past was my past. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in 2 years, my brother Leo. The message was only 4 words, but they landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Dad saw the article. My brother's text message was a warning shot. For 2 days, I lived in a state of high alert, a ghost of my former anxiety haunting the edges of my newfound peace. Every buzz of my phone made my heart leap into my throat. I knew they were coming. The silence had been broken not by an apology but by the news of my success. They weren't proud, they were opportunistic. The first contact was a call from my mother. Her voice, which I hadn't heard in over 2 years, was a strange mix of forced sweetness and awkwardness. "Clara, dear," she began, "your father and I saw the article. We are just so surprised by how well you've done for yourself." There was no mention of the past, no apology for their cruelty, just a glossing over, as if the last 2 years had been a brief, unpleasant holiday. She said they were proud, but the word sounded hollow, like a counterfeit coin. She was testing the waters, seeing if the door was unlocked. I kept my answers short, polite, and professional, giving her nothing to hold on to. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, it happened. My assistant buzzed my intercom, her voice hesitant. "Clara, there's a couple here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they say they're your parents." My blood ran cold. Of course they came to my office. This wasn't a personal visit. It was a business assessment. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and told her to send them in. They walked into my office, which suddenly felt too small. They looked older, but they carried themselves with the same unshakable air of entitlement. My father's eyes swept the room, not with pride, but with the critical gaze of an appraiser valuing an asset. My mother smiled, a tight social smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara, this is quite an impressive little setup you have here," my father said, the compliment soured by the condescending adjective. "Success agrees with you, dear," my mother added, looking at my dress. "You look less stressed." They were speaking to me as if I were a distant relative, a curiosity they had come to observe. We exchanged a few more meaningless pleasantries, the air thick with unspoken history. Finally, my father got to the point. He leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from feigned pride to serious business. "Well, Clara," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, "now that we see how well you're doing, your mother and I have a proposition for you. It's a family matter." A family matter. The words hung in the air of my office, sanitized and sterile, designed to mask the rotten core beneath. I steeled myself, keeping my expression neutral, a mask I had perfected over 2 years of hardship. My mother began, her voice taking on the martyred tone she reserved for delivering bad news that she believed wasn't her fault. "Clara, it's about your brother," she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a silk handkerchief. "Leo, ... He's fallen on hard times. The company he's with is downsizing and his position is being eliminated. He has a family to think of, a mortgage." I listened, a cold fury building inside me. Leo, the golden child. The one who had taken the safe path. The one whose stability they had always contrasted with my reckless ambition. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My father cleared his throat, taking over as the closer. "Your brother is a smart man, with a solid business degree," he said, as if stating facts from a resume. "He's at a crossroads, and we see a perfect solution, a family solution." He looked around my office again, at my employees visible through the glass wall, at the award on my shelf. "This company you've built, Phoenix Digital, it's growing fast. It needs experienced leadership to guide it through the next phase, someone you can trust. I knew what was coming before the words left his mouth. "We want you to hire Leo," he declared. "Not just an entry-level job, of course. He would come in as your chief operating officer. He could handle the finances, the strategy, the serious business side of things, allowing you to focus on the creative." There it was, the shameless, breathtaking audacity. They weren't asking for a loan. They were staging a takeover. They wanted to install their son in a position of power within the company I had built from nothing, from the ashes of the life they had helped burn down. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the 2 years they left me to drown. Just an entitled, transactional demand. My mother finished her plea, and my father looked at me, expectant, as if he had just offered me a wonderful opportunity. I let the silence stretch, watching them in my office in the company I built from dust. Then, I leaned forward, looked my father directly in the eye, and asked a single, quiet question. Why? My question hung in the air, simple and sharp. Why? My father stared at me, bewildered, as if I'd asked him to explain the color of the sky. "Why?" he sputtered. "Because he's your brother, Clara, because he's family, and family helps each other. It's the right thing to do." That was the answer. I expected the answer that sealed their fate in my mind. The hollow, self-serving definition of family they had always lived by. I slowly stood up, the movement deliberate, and walked around to the front of my desk. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter being lectured. I was the CEO in her own boardroom. "Let's talk about family," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 2 years of silence. "The last time I was in a family matter meeting, I was told that my dream had embarrassed you. I was told I was a lesson that needed to be learned alone. I was told to get out." I saw my mother flinch. My father's jaw tightened. When my world collapsed, I continued. "This family's only contribution was silence. When I was sleeping in my car, you were sleeping in your comfortable beds. When I was selling my grandmother's locket to eat, you were maintaining your image." I took a step closer. This company, Phoenix Digital, wasn't built on family connections or safe choices. It was built on 18-hour days in a diner. It was built in a public library because I couldn't afford my own internet. It was built on the ashes of the life you all turned your backs on. The core values of this company are resilience, merit, and integrity. We hire people who have proven they can build, not people who have proven they can fail in comfort. I let my words sink in, watching the color drain from their faces. "So, to answer your proposition to install your son, who followed the safe path to failure as an executive in my company, ... No." The word was clean, final. The answer is no. Leo will not have a job here. Not now, not ever. My father opened his mouth to shout, his face turning a dark shade of red, but I held up a hand. "This meeting is over," I said, my voice calm, and even I walked to my office door and held it open for them. "I believe you know the way out." Watching them walk away, stripped of their power and entitlement, I didn't feel vengeful. I felt freed. After the door clicked shut behind them, a new kind of silence filled my office. It wasn't the menacing, empty silence of their abandonment from 2 years ago. This was a silence that felt clean, expansive, and full of possibility. The storm had finally passed, and I was still standing. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from my parents, and for the first time in my life, I felt no anxiety about it. Their absence was no longer a punishment. It was a peaceful boundary I had drawn with my own hands. My life began to fill with a different kind of family, the family I chose. It was my brilliant developer, who trusted me when I was just an anonymous freelancer. It was my small, dedicated team at Phoenix Digital, who celebrated our wins with genuine joy. It was even the memory of the gruff diner manager who gave me a chance when I had nothing. Family, I learned, isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who believe in your light, even when you can't see it yourself. About a month later, I received one last text from my brother Leo. It wasn't angry or demanding. It was just a few simple words. "I quit my job," it read. "Decided to go back to school for architectural engineering. It's what I always wanted to do. For what it's worth, Clara, you were right." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. A sign that my stand had created a crack in the fortress, allowing someone else to find their own escape. Sometimes, I drive past that park and I see the bench where I sat with nothing but a few crumpled bills and a shattered soul. I don't feel the shame anymore. I feel a quiet sense of gratitude for the woman who sat there, the woman who had lost everything but still found the strength to get up. She was the true founder of my company. My success isn't measured by the balance in my bank account or the awards on my shelf. It's measured by the peace I feel when I wake up in the morning, by the genuine laughter I share with my chosen family, and by the uncheckable knowledge that my worth is not determined by anyone else's approval. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am on my own, but I am finally completely whole.